Hello everybody and welcome to Science Live again. We're coming to you today from the Creation Museum in Petersburg, Kentucky and Discovery Hall where we have a lot of our workshops for the museum. I'm Mr. Roger Patterson and this is Dr. Georgia Purdom. Why are you here with us today?
Well, because we're going to be talking about some anatomy, and I taught anatomy and physiology when I was a college professor, and so I have some experience with that. And actually my PhD is in bone genetics. So
Okay.
It's in genetics, but I specifically studied the bones. So.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about bones today. We'll also be introducing you to some changes coming up in the program.
Some good changes. We're excited.
There's going to be a new platform launching that some of you may know about, so lots of cool things coming up. We'll be exploring all of those things today. So you got comments today?
Well, I'm getting on there.
Okay.
I'm talking, so lots of people are there. Some comments, yeah. Oklahoma's here.
All right.
Pennsylvania's here, so we're getting the people on.
Lots of people joining us.
Yeah.
Okay. We are here today to talk about the other part of the body. Last week we talked about our arms and all those joints and muscles and things that are going on. So today we're going to be talking about the legs. Okay. So everything from your waist down basically we'll be talking about. And a lot of this should be kind of refresher information because we've talked a little bit about this. So all of these bones that we have on the table today are bones of the leg. And we talked about leg bones. We typically call the leg bones long bones because
They're long.
whoa, big surprise. And this should look familiar to you as we talked about this with Dr. Menton the other day and Dr. Rivera. This is the pelvis, and this is what we would think of as our hip bones. So we're going to think about the way all of these pieces work together and how they move, the muscles and the bones and the tendons and the ligaments, all those things that we talked about with the arm. We're going to basically be doing the same thing, but doing that with the knees. So the other day I took off my lab coat to show you my big muscles in my arms. Today, you can't see right now, but I wore shorts, so you can see all those things happening in the leg. So we'll have a live leg model looking at all those different things. Okay.
I'm not sure model is the right word.
Oh,
there,
okay,
but
all right. It's an example anyway.
in that sense.
In that sense. Okay, so on the table here we have some of the basic bones of the leg, and we've got the skeleton over here. And I think I've been calling him the wrong name. I had gone after Dr. Menton's lead of calling him Yorick from the Hamlet recitation, alas, Yorick, I knew you well. I was calling him Ulrich, so I think I was getting messed up with the Swiss reformer Ulrich Zwingli.
Oh, yes.
So Yorick, the skeleton. Okay, so if we think about the bones that we have here on the table, this is actually a real human femur. In the past, we've had several people asking questions about whether the bones we're using are real or not. This is the only bone that we have that is an actual human bone. So this was taken from a male in his upper 60s, and you can see the different structures here. So this is the bottom of the femur. So this is the spot where the knee joint would be, down in this little groove. And you can maybe see this little line right here. It makes two little bumps. That's the epiphyseal plate that we talked about, the growth plates. So this is clearly closed and fused. There are no gaps. So this is an older individual. If we follow up the bone, we can see all these little gaps inside of here. That's where all the vascular tissue and other tissue is that helps make red blood cells and things. This groove that we can see coming through here, this is where the bone marrow would be. So if you've ever broken open a chicken leg and seen the black stuff inside, that's the bone marrow. And then up here we have another little marrow pocket. And then this is the bump on the outside of your hip. This is the one that we measured from the other day, the greater trochanter. This is the neck of the femur, and then this is the ball joint that goes into the femur. So here's a real intact human bone that's been sawed for us to see inside. You had some big science words of the day you wanted to mention about that.
Yes. So when I was studying bones, we were mainly looking at the bone cells and things that control the bone cells. So there's three main types of bone cells. There's osteoblasts and there's osteoclasts, right? So osteoblasts, remember the B, they build bone.
B for build.
Osteoblasts build bone. Osteoclasts, on the other hand, break bone down, right? So your bone, I think a lot of people think that bone is just sort of this static thing that once it grows, and that's it. Your bone is modeling all the time, what we call remodeling. So bone is being built, new bone's being built, old bone's being broken down. So your whole skeleton is probably not more than I think a few years old or
at any given time.
At any given time. Now, as you get older, that process goes a lot slower.
Slows down.
So, older people tend to be more prone to breaks because the bone is not as refreshing itself, so to speak, as much. And so that bone breaks easier. There is a third type of cell called the osteocytes, which are very mature bone cells, basically, that help with communications within the bone. So bone is very active and living. It's very vascular. It's not a static thing at all.
Yeah. Okay, so those big science words of the day, osteoblast and osteoclast. So osteo, that prefix that we put, or that first part of the word, is anytime we talk about bones, we're going to use the prefix osteo. So you may have heard osteoarthritis, or you may get nutrient supplements that have osteo in the name, and those are intended for bone health. So osteoblasts build up, osteoclasts tear down, and so they're always working to remodel one another. That would drive me crazy. I just built something and somebody's going to
just stopped, our bone would get old and it would break really, really easily. So God designed it to have these things building and breaking down all the time, so that we can have strong bones throughout most of our life. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so let me know if you got any good questions there.
We did have one. Somebody said they're very interested in this because evolutionists are saying that knees are poorly designed. Yep.
Absolutely. Okay, so here I have the whole part of the leg bone articulated. So this section up here, this is the femur measuring down here. Now, if you joined us last week when Dr. Rivera was with us, we tried to measure my femur and figure out my height from that. And we took a distance from this part of the greater trochanter, that bump you can feel on the outside of your hip, down to here at the knee joint. And we got my length to be 22 inches. Now, we made a big blunder on camera. Rather than reading 22 inches, I needed to read the little tiny numbers down here at the bottom, and it was 56 centimeters. And so 22 made me like 4 feet, 5 inches tall. I think I'm a little taller than that.
Just a little.
The formula actually did work for me. We just did a miscalculation during the broadcast. So,
and that happens because scientists make mistakes, and we go back. Right. That's why we double check things and go back and do that.
Okay. So moving down from the femur then, the femur would articulate inside of the pelvis. So this little socket right here, okay, this is called the acetabulum. So this socket that you can see, this is the socket for the ball of the femur to rotate in. And just like we had up in the shoulder, we have a ball and socket joint, which allows us to go in and out, up and down, and rotate in little circles. So if you were to stand on one leg, you'd be able to make all of those motions with your leg. You can lift it forward. Okay, so this would be called flexion of the hip. You can extend it back. You can abduct it by pulling it out. You can adduct it by pulling it in. And then it pronates and supinates, or rotates, in this plane right here. So you've got all 6 of those motions in your hip joint. As we move down to the knee joint, where the femur connects to the tibia and then the fibula, this joint is not as mobile as that. It's only has 2 ranges of motion, basically. So this is what we call a hinge joint. So if you think about the way your knee articulates, this is about as far forward as it will go, and then it bends backward like this. Okay? So if my thigh were holding still, I could lift my heel up in the air, and I could bend that. So it's basically only one direction that this goes. We only have one range of motion here. Now there's a little bit of rotation and a little bit of other movements side to side, but if there's too much of that,
you're going to get in trouble really fast.
Trouble.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
All right, and we'll talk about how this attaches. This smaller bone down the side is called the fibula. The fibula is on the outside of your lower leg. So if you were to reach down right above where your shoe is on the outside of your foot, there's a little bump on the outside of your foot, and that's this end of the fibula. If you reach on the inside of your ankle, you'll feel a little bump. and that's this bump inside on the tibia. Okay? So 3 major bones in the leg, and they all work together.
I have a question.
Okay.
All right, Lydia, age 12, wants to know, when your bones break down, is that what causes growth pains?
When there's very rapid growth, you get stretching of the nerves and the blood
Right.
vessels and those types of things, and that's what we often think of as growth pains, or growing pains, when you have that rapid period of growth.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, well, keep them coming,
Okay,
people.
so let's think about, the other day we talked about tendons and ligaments. You want to remind them what the difference is?
Tendons attach bone to muscle, and ligaments attach bone to bone.
So I don't want my knee bones to go flying apart. So God has
That'd be bad.
kindly provided some glue. I'm going to use this blue tape to represent the different ligaments. Now this is a right leg, and on this right leg, there's actually a ligament, because it's connecting bone to bone, that comes across here. And on the inside, there's another one that goes from the femur down and attaches. This would be up here a little bit higher in the back, but, oh, and my tape folded to do a little ligament surgery there. It attaches down here. Now you can imagine, and this is going to be very difficult to hold up here, if these ligaments are here, this doesn't allow, I can't bend it side to side. So these ligaments down each side are called the collateral ligaments, because they run down each side of the leg bones. And those collateral ligaments, you may have heard somebody gets an MCL tear or an MCL sprain. So when we think about our bodies, the middle of our bodies, we call the medial section. So that would be on the inside of the leg. And the outside, we call the lateral sides. So this would be the lateral leg. So the lateral collateral ligament, it's got a double lateral, runs down the outside. The medial runs down the inside, and that helps you to keep your knees stable. If those get torn or stretched, we can have issues with our knee joints articulating. And there are 2 more inside of there. What other ligaments have you heard about connected with knee injuries? Well, the most popular one is an ACL. So there's another acronym we use. That's the there are 2 ligaments that make a cross inside of the knee, so in between the bones, and those are called the cruciate ligaments, because cruciate in Latin means to cross. So if we could look down inside, I'm going to tear these ligaments off so we can look inside, and we'll throw them on the floor. We don't need them anymore. You can see this little groove right here. This holds one of those ligaments, and it attaches up here, and they cross in the front. So that prevents the knee from extending too far forward, so you can't hyperextend it, and the back one keeps it from flexing too far. Now, when we have injuries to the ACL, which crosses down in the middle here, we can't see it when the joint's closed. When we have injuries to the ACL, it often happens in athletic type of movements. So if this is a football player running down the field, or a basketball player running down the court, and he wants to cut and make a quick movement back to the other side, his knee has to absorb all of his body weight and all that momentum. And you can imagine the snaps and cracks and popples that happen when that happens. And so when I was coaching, I was the one who was designated to deal with all of those things. Not fun sounds to hear
definitely
on
not.
your own body or in somebody else. So if this slides forward too far, it can tear those ligaments in between. If it gets pulled over too far one way or the other, it can snap the collateral ligaments or do damage to them. So that's how our knee joints are made, so that they can articulate and move our bodies.
Okay, so someone wants to know, why can some people stretch their joints more than others? So I think we talked about that with the arms.
So the general term there we would use is range of motion. So any joint has a range of motion that's normal, and different individuals have different degrees of range of motion. So if your joints go more than normal, we call that hypermobility. So it's generally to do with the tightness of the ligaments and the tendons and the muscles that are all connected together there. So if you have loose joints, those ligaments and tendons are a bit softer, or the muscles aren't strong enough to hold them together.
And Tommy, age 12, wants to know, how long does it take for a broken knee to heal?
A broken knee, if a joint can't really break, we call that a dislocation if the different bones in the joint come apart from one another. You can break a femur. Break takes a long time to heal because it's a bigger diameter bone, and it's harder to stabilize it and keep it still. Tibia the same way. Fibula fractures can heal relatively quickly.
I think he
because
might
it's a
be
small
talking about
bone.
the patella, actually.
Okay, so we
the
haven't
kneecap.
mentioned one of
We're gonna
the
get
most
there.
important bones. There's a little bone that sits up here that isn't in this model called the patella. You probably call it
Your kneecap.
your kneecap, yep. So your kneecap is something that you can break. And we had somebody who worked here at the ministry. He broke his kneecap into like 12 different pieces.
Ugh.
It was terrible. He fell down on the ice. And there they had to reconstruct and pin and screw it back together. And that can be a very long process because your patella is one of the most important bones in your leg. And it does a lot of work, even though we don't see it and see what
And
it
it has a
does.
fancy name, too. It has another name. So, well, it's a type of what we call sesamoid bone because it's actually not directly, I mean, it's not like these where these are up against basically each other. It's just basically
It floats
floating
around.
kind of here.
Yeah. Okay, so let's come over here to the model of the skeleton and just kind of refresh a few of those things. All right, now you can tell I'm really wearing shorts. So if we think about, we need like a Velcro strap to help him do the Pledge of Allegiance here. If we think about this hip up here, so here's the blades of the hip and this ball and socket joint at the head of the femur. Okay, there we go. We had a little audio issue there. If you look here on the outside, this is the bump that you can feel with your finger on the outside of your hip, the greater trochanter. Now, this is where a lot of muscles attach and come down the femur, down the leg. So this joint, we can flex the hip up. We can extend it back. Remember, flexion is closing a joint, making it smaller. Extension is opening it. We can abduct it by pulling it out. We can adduct it by pulling it in. And then it rotates in and out, that supination and pronation motion there. If we come down, you can see the patella in this model is very clear right here. So the patella sits on top of the femur. And there's a little bump right here on top of the tibia. This is going to be very important. There are a big set of muscles that run down here we'll talk about. The tendon goes over the top and attaches down here. And then you can see the fibula running down the backside. So here's the bump on the outside of your ankle. And over here, the bump on the inside of your ankle. And that connects to the metatarsals and then the tarsals. And then your toe bones, the phalanges down there, or the digits. So those are all of the main muscles, or the main bones in the leg.
Okay, someone wants to know, what about a torn meniscus?
Torn meniscus.
Yeah, whatever.
Okay.
See, I knew I'd say it wrong.
The meniscus is part of, they're on top of the, you'll notice that the femur has two bumps here. So these two bumps on the femur, there's a meniscus that sits in here, and this is what we call articulating cartilage. So there's that layer of cartilage that fits between there. So the bones would actually have a gap, and each bone is covered with cartilage. And it's that smooth, slippery surface that's lubricated with synovial fluid, allows your knee to move. And so if you have a torn meniscus, that's where that surface gets a tear in it, or a scrape, or a little flap. There are different types of tears that can happen inside there. And then your joint tends to catch, and it doesn't move very well. About 3 years ago, I had a very extreme form of that. Okay, here's gross picture time. So if you don't like gross pictures, you might want to hide your eyes for a second. About 3 years ago, I had a surgery, and that surgery involved repairing the inside of my knee. And the doctors went in and they did a laparoscopic surgery. And in this image over here, you can see here's the interior of my knee. This is the bottom of my femur, or yeah, the bottom of my femur, where that cartilage is, and you can see this big tear right here. You can see this pocket where it's worn, the cartilage was worn clear down to the bone. So my bones were rubbing against each other, and it wasn't very fun. And what they did, you can see this is the same thing. Here's the area. They went in and cut out a lot of that, the little flap of cartilage that was right here, and they cleaned up these edges, and then they fractured this bone with little microfractures down the middle to help it regenerate the cartilage. And that's how they can go in and repair that damage that's done inside of joints and things today. So this is where we think about reversing bodies. Okay, I'll put the gross picture away. All right, so let's come over here and think about the patella and how important it is. So this was my Sunday afternoon project. I said, honey, I'll be out in the garage building a knee joint. So you can see this. This is a model of the knee joint. So this upper would be the femur, and the bottom here would be the tibia, and it's been cut off with a bone saw. Okay, so we call this a hinge joint. It can't move very far side to side, and it only moves up and down in these directions. Okay? I've got a rubber band on here to represent the patellar tendon and the femoral tendon that come up here. And there's a set of muscles up here, and when these muscles contract, represented by pulling on this rubber band, they're supposed to pull the leg up. But you'll notice the tibia is not coming up very well, and I'm stretching this way back here. Okay? So if I add something that's missing, this little piece is going to represent the patella. I'm going to attach a patella to this model with some Velcro. And now, if I hold the rubber band in the same position, watch what happens. The leg comes right up with even less force than I had to apply before. This, to me, looks like some amazing design. God designed the patella as an extra point of leverage to be able to pull that leg up. So you wouldn't be able to do this if you didn't have a patella, or it would take a lot more force and put a lot more strain on your knee. So our patella is very important. And if we come back here to the femur model, you'll notice that if we look down the face of the femur here, you'll see this makes a little pocket, a little groove here. This little groove, the femoral groove, is where the patella slides in there. The patella is actually V-shaped on the bottom. Now, the reason my knees got worn out so fast, I was only 42 when I had my knee surgery. My body is a bit abnormal. It does not have this nice groove in there, and so my patella just goes wherever it wants to. It doesn't have a track to flow and follow that pathway. So that's what caused the damage to my knee. All right, so we're going to talk about muscles now. So I'm going to take off my lab coat. Any questions coming in?
Not that I see it. People were just oohing and grossing out at your pictures, so thanks for that.
There was no blood or anything.
Oh, come on, people. It's fun.
Okay, I'm going to pull this chair over here and sit down, and we're going to think about the muscles that operate across these joints. Okay, so if I think about right up here, the top of my leg is, I can feel that bump. That's my greater trochanter, and my femur is set inside of here. There are muscles that are on the back side of my leg, and these would help the ones that are up higher, help to pull my leg down, so they extend the hip. And then the ones on top, these are the ones that would flex the hip. So if I lift my leg and I think about my hip joint is getting smaller, or the angle here is getting smaller, so I'm flexing my hip joint. If I push it down, then I'm extending it. My knee can also flex and extend too. So the muscles here in the leg, you have legs on top, or muscles on top of your leg. These muscles, there are 4 of them. 2 run down the outside and 2 down the middle. So if there are 4 of them, if there are 4 of them, we call them quadriceps. Just like in our arm, we had a biceps with 2 heads. These are 4 different muscles that all come down around here. So if I flex my leg, you can see there's a muscle here, There's a muscle right here on the outside, and there's a muscle here on the inside, this little bump right here, and then there's one that's underneath here that we can't see on the surface. And all of those muscles, these are the flexor muscles that hold my knee joint, the extensor muscles for my knee, and then my hamstrings on the back, those flex. When these contract, that will pull my knee joint down. So I'm flexing the knee joint by using my hamstring muscles on the back of my leg, and I'm extending by using my quadriceps muscles on the front. Okay. So all of these muscles are working in pairs, as we talked about last week. We call them protagonists and antagonists, and there's synergy if multiple muscles work together and all of those things. Down here in the lower leg, we have basically the same thing. We have two muscles up here. If we can come around the back a little bit, there's a muscle out here and a muscle in here called the gastrocnemius. And then there's a muscle that runs down the backside. It's called the soleus. So all of those muscles, if I contract these, they point my toes down. My ankle bends down. If I contract these muscles, so that's extending the joint, these on the front then would be flexors, and they flex the joint and close that joint down at my leg. And all of those connect down through a series of tendons. The one you probably know about is this one right back here. This is the Achilles tendon. There's a fancy Latin name for that, but we'll just leave it with Achilles.
Don't look at me. I know about Achilles heel. We talk about Achilles heel.
So that name comes from a Greek myth where Achilles was dipped in something to give him protection by one of the goddesses, and she had to hold on to him, and that was his only vulnerable spot on his body. So that's where we get the colloquial name for that. Okay, so all of these muscles that allow me to flex my hip and extend my knee, all of those things are working in basic pairs. I can abduct by coming out, I can adduct by coming in. All of these things are working together in concert with nerves and blood vessels in my brain and all types of things.
All right, so someone wants to know, what does it mean when you get shin splints?
Okay, shin splints.
Uh-oh.
I experienced that a lot playing basketball. So if you think about the lower part of the leg, we typically call this part our shin, where the tibia, the front of the tibia right here. So if you are always pounding this on the ground, it's actually going to flex the bone, and you can get strains and cracks along the front here, and there can be separation in the tissues, the tendons and the ligaments that are running through this area, especially the tendons of the muscles inside here where they're attaching together, and the fascia that bind the muscles together. Those things get a lot of stress, and that causes pain. So that's typically what we would call shin splints.
And then someone wants to know what causes fat to accumulate on the inside of the knee. How to get rid of it. Never had it until knee surgery.
It may not be fat. It may just be some fluid that builds up in there. If you were to look at my left knee compared to my right knee, even though it's had surgery, it tends to build up fluid by inflammation a lot more rapidly. So I doubt that it's fat. It's probably inflammation. But again, I'm not a doctor. Right. I'm not giving you medical advice. I'm just trying to describe some of these basic functions there.
And too, with the Achilles heel, when we talk about that, if that tendon there breaks, whoa. I mean, there's so much force, there's so much stretching going on that when that breaks, the whole muscle can just snap back up. Yeah. Oh, painful.
It's very ugly looking too. I have seen one of those in person.
Yeah.
It's not a fun thing to watch happen. Yeah. We had another question last week. Somebody asked about, are there muscles in the hand and the feet? So if we could go to the bottom of your feet, you actually have muscles working inside of there. Again, there are no muscles inside of the toes, but there are muscles underneath of your feet and along the outer edge. And those are responsible for contracting your toes, for flexing the toes down. And so they have fancy names like digitorum flexorum. So
they're really long Latin names.
Digits are the toes, and flexor and extensor. A lot of the names are related to those things.
Yeah. Because even when people, if you think about it, some people who have lost their hands, they can do things with their feet that are actually pretty amazing. We usually take it for granted because we do so much with our hands. We don't need to use our feet, but you can do a lot of the same things with your feet that you do with your hands because they're designed very similarly.
Yes, and you will all be thankful I didn't take my shoes off today because my wife calls my toes skeleton toes because I have very long toes. So I can pick up an orange with my toes because they're so long.
We don't want to know that. Yeah,
And
TMI.
they're double jointed, so the joint bends backward. So party tricks with Roger's toes. Okay. All right. That's the basics of what we wanted to teach you about the leg today and how everything works together. Just a reminder of the ingenuity that God has put into this design. And we actually copy these things. We talked about Dr. Stuart Burgess and his work and the way he looks at knee joints to understand how they work and then copy those. There's a legend that this angle right here that you see, that this angle of the femur was actually copied by Eiffel when he built the Eiffel Tower. So if you look at the base of the Eiffel Tower, it has 4 of these angles right here coming up for support because this is so strong. Think about all of the weight of your body has to be held up by that part of the bone.
And you can kind of see that the bone here is much more intense, so to speak,
see how
dense.
This area is right through here compared to down here. Okay? This is the strength area. So if you get a fracture in the upper part of your femur, it's usually right across this area, okay? Because this area is much more compact and stronger. All right, so that's all of our teaching for today. But we do want to remind you that we've got more programming coming today, and those things will be happening at noon, 3 and 7. And then, Dr. Purdom?
We also have our current special, which is free shipping on orders of $50 or more. So take advantage of that in our web store. Lots of great things to use.
And as I kind of teased last week, we've been doing this live program now. I think this is episode 29 or 30 every day for quite a while. And as things are coming into balance with all of the restrictions and other things in place, we're trying to restructure some of the things that we're doing so you can be looking for some changes coming. We'll have more details for you probably on Thursday or Friday. But starting next week, there's going to be a change to our live stream schedules, so be looking for those things being announced, and a new platform for giving you all of this great content. We still are going to be doing live programs.
We'll still be here.
But fewer in number over the next few weeks. And as people are getting into summer routines and ending school things, all of those things are going to be in play. So watch out for that information. And in the meantime, we hope you can get out and explore and enjoy God's amazing creation.